And we're live. It is Thursday, the fourth day of the month of September. It is the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m. Holly Berkley Fletcher is hidden behind the cactuses like uh like one of those sprites in a garden whom you know is behind the leaves of a tree, but you can't quite see, and you know she's watching you, and you suspect she may be judging you, but you're not sure, and you don't know where to look, but you kind of know she's there. And some days, my friends, I wake up in the morning and I am really excited to do the show. And I don't know, it's just, it's bubbling out of me. And some mornings I wake up and fortunately there aren't that many of these mornings, but they do happen. If they happened more, I probably wouldn't do the show. When I wake up and I say, why do I do a live stream every morning at 8 o'clock? That's a crazy thing to do because I actually haven't spoken yet this morning, and I was lying on the couch drinking coffee and texting with Nastia, and life was fine, and there was no reason for me to get up and come over and talk essentially nonstop for an hour without thinking about what I was going to be talking about. There was no reason to do that. But I did it anyway because uh, life has habits. And one of these habits that I have is that every morning I sit in front of this computer, or sometimes downstairs um, in the hammock studio, and I talk to a group of people, most of whom I have never met and will never meet. Um, with most of the time a lady across the river who is hidden behind cactuses and has a lot to say, and whom I met because she scored me an invitation to the French ambassador's residence to talk about, to celebrate the French village. One of the revolutionary features of the show, um, and there are many, is that,
You're kind of getting ahead of yourself.
well, I don't always do things in the same order, but you're right. For order's sake, let's do it. And you know, notwithstanding the fact that I'm dragging a little bit this morning, and I'm probably going to rely on the effervescent Holly Berkley Fletcher to add the bubbles to this morning's sparkling wine. Um, uh, is that even when that happens, the sun is shining, the birds are chirping, it is going to be a great freaking day. And the cactuses behind which Holly, like a sprite in the woods,
You're going on too long.
you are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is a fucking revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features, of which there are many, is that even when I'm dragging, I don't hide it from you. There's no like, cover my face with base and blacken the gray part of my eyebrow, and be like it's all mornings are the same, behind the camera. That it's just, we don't do that here. I'm just telling you, I'm dragging a little bit this morning. And another one of the revolutionary features is that the chorus of cactuses does repeat the last thing that I say before it goes into its cactus chorus. And
If I turn them on too early, which
Right.
I
No,
do.
I think it's great. And, it is great to have your stupid words parroted back at you by a dancing cactus at 8 in the morning. All of which is a 5 minute long-winded way of saying that we are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have a show on what I hope will be a quiet morning. And It's great to see actually none of you except Holly. I'm sure I will see some of you later in the hour, and that will be great. But to see the presence of 29 of you all on line to watch me drag this morning. Holly, how are you this morning?
Well, I'm a little draggy too. I wonder if there's like an allergy situation because I've been feeling like I was coming down with like a cold, but yet it doesn't get worse. It just stays like kind of the scratchy throat stage. And so I'm wondering, and then the really telltale thing is my eyes are gunky. And like
Yeah.
that's an allergy thing, that's not a cold thing. So I'm wondering because it's been very dry. So I wonder if it's like the dryness of things. And I was outside a lot yesterday, so I'm thinking I'm having some allergy issues
Well,
today.
one of the cool things about the um, uh, current weather situation,
It's so nice,
it
except for
is
the
so
allergy.
gorgeous.
Yes,
And
yes.
it's bad to have no rain for this long in the Washington area. But there is an advantage, and that is that when I draw on the sidewalk, and I am not admitting to any particular instance of
I
chalk
saw some
crime,
things
but
in your vicinity.
I am admitting in general that I have been writing on the sidewalk in chalk. One of the cool things is that it takes forever to wash away if it doesn't rain. Just saying it's a great time to commit chalk crime.
Well, that reminds me, I still need to ask my pastors about you doing the flag on our church parking lot. Which isn't,
Yeah.
it's not like, I mean, it's not like it's a good venue. It's not like the Russian embassy venue. Like you'll
Well, the thing about the Russian embassy venue is that the Secret Service shows up and gets upset at me. And I'm still thinking, by the way, did you read the New York Times story about the most awesome projection protest in the history of the world?
what, yours?
No, no, no. This is next level shit. Uh,
Oh,
Um, so this is a guy in China.
oh, in China.
Yeah. And here's
Wow.
what he does. He sets up, I think it's like in a hotel room, or in a projection denouncing the Communist Party onto a building across the street. But wait, it gets better.
That's gutsy.
Then he sets up surveillance cameras of the room that he's projecting from. Then he goes to London. And from London, he turns on the projection,
Oh my
um,
gosh.
and he films not merely that it takes like 45 minutes for the authorities to figure out where the projection is coming from and um, uh, break into the room, but he then films, he has the surveillance camera of them breaking into the room and taking down the camera. So it's like a turning the Chinese surveillance state on itself, and
Oh
he
my gosh.
operates the whole thing from London.
He's like he should join CIA. They could use a guy like this.
It's next level projection.
Wow. So does he have like asylum now
I
or
don't know what his status is. I will find the projection protest, China, New York Times. Um, yeah, here
because
it
he's not
is.
going to be able to go back.
Oh no, he is. he is not going back. He
It's
is
a
going
one-time thing. This is not something he can repeat.
right.
But I
Um,
mean, epic. If you're gonna do a one-time thing, it
it
should be
is
epic.
it is an epic. I think it is the greatest ever projection troll.
I
And
mean,
as somebody who um, you know does this, I wouldn't say for a living, because I certainly don't make a living doing this. But here is a picture of the projection. It says, "Overthrow the tyranny of the Communist Party."
whoa,
So it is no joke. Rise up, you who refuse to be slaves. Freedom is
whoa,
no gift. Take it back.
whoa.
Um,
And that's like that's some government headquarter thing,
I don't
or
know what it is, what the building is, but it's, visible from a highway. You can see the highway underneath over here. Um, uh, and so the Times says it took the police 50 minutes to locate where the projection was coming from, a hotel nearby, and shut it down. That's usually the end of such protests in China, but not in this case. A few hours later, the activist released video footage of 5 police officers entering the hotel room, rushing to the window and finding the projector hidden behind a half closed curtain, while 4 of them were fiddling to shut it down. Another officer pointed with surprise to a surveillance camera aimed at them. A handwritten letter addressed to the
whoa.
police was on the coffee table. Even if you are a beneficiary of the system today, one day you will inevitably become a victim on this land, said the letter, which the activist also circulated online. So please treat the people with kindness.
Wow.
Um,
Wow. So he is in
Oh,
London.
and then he also has video footage of them questioning his frail, hunched mother in front of her village home. Um, and he had turned on the projection and recorded the police presence from a remote location in London. So I just want to say this is
We
epic
bow
shit.
to you, Mr. How do you say that?
I guess it's Kui Hong. I don't know. I don't do Mandarin pronunciation,
Mike
but I
Feinberg.
just want to say it's,
Chi.
you
Carol says
know,
Chi.
you know,
Mr. Chi.
like, be, uh, like, I dabble in this shit, but the people who are good at it, it is astonishing what you can do.
And here's the difference, by the way, between China and Russia. Um, Russia, they'd come to London and kill his ass.
Well, in China, they'll come to in Russia, in the Chinese will come to London and threaten his family to him, and
For sure. Yeah.
put a lot of pressure on him.
But Novichok, like the Russians would do some sort of Novichok thing or whatever. But anyway,
Anyway, hats
good.
off.
Hats off, Mr. And Carol says it's Chi, Mr.
Ah,
Chi.
well,
So
I I am every now and then I've spent some time over the last few years, including on this show, with people who do projection art for a living. Particularly a woman that I've gotten to know, Yulia Shamsheva, who is um, uh, and I've dabbled in this stuff, and I'm not bad at it for a you know mid 50s, middle aged think tank desk worker in Washington who actually does something else for a living. But never forget the difference between like people who really know what they're doing with this shit and people like me.
you could do a hotel room, like from a hotel room. That's an idea. Like you do it from a hotel room, not remote control, but could you do it from, from across the street or something?
Well, so I have thought about the remote aspects, and you need a target. The Russian embassy you cannot target from. There is one hotel that has a view of the
Oh, you
Russian
were going to
embassy.
rent that house for a while.
I
That's
was
right.
working on
Yeah.
renting an apartment.
Yeah.
The own management company of which would not rent to me, as it turned out. um, and I can't really blame them. The plan was to use the apartment to house a Ukrainian refugee um, and a projector. They did not approve of the Ukrainian refugee part, which I have to say was the wrong reason to reject the idea.
Bizarre.
Um, yeah, no, their view was nobody, you can't rent an apartment without telling us who's going to live in it, and I didn't know who was going to live in it because I
Wow.
was going to sponsor somebody and make housing available. But so that never worked out. But I was interested um, in the component of it that I've thought about the remote issue a lot. But for the remote thing to work, you need a powerful enough projector close enough to a target. Now, I have looked at this video pretty carefully. This guy is using a very powerful projector. Um, but he's also projecting just very simple text, right? So I could do that. I could set up a remote operation, but there's no need for me to set up a remote operation because I'm not dealing with the Chinese Communist Party yet.
Well, not a remote, but just like you be there in a hotel room and maybe you could project without getting like, not bothered by the, various authorities.
Right. So then you have to be in a hotel room across the street from or next to the building that you want to project on. And that's a tricky business, right? It can't easily be done. You have to be in the right hotel room, not merely in the
Yeah.
right hotel.
Yeah,
So
there's logistical
it's a
issues.
complicated little thing. Um,
Complicated.
and uh, yeah, but the idea of filming the response, that is um,
Yes,
chef's
I mean,
kiss.
there's like layer. This is like a lasagna of delight,
Exactly.
He thought of all kinds of things. So it's truly a monumental accomplishment and a delight to see. So
And having it up for 50 minutes is an incredible thing. I mean, if you stand on on a street corner with a sign in a Chinese city, you will be there for 5 minutes before you are
oh
shuffled
sh-
into,
oh,
you know,
and
uh,
then you'll be in jail for your rest of your life.
for the rest of your life. And by the way, that happened in Shanghai several times during COVID, and people got very frustrated um, um, and did protests and were, the elapsed time between when the protest starts and when people are uh, hustled away and never heard from again is short. The So to be up for 15 minutes with something big, 50
50. I thought
minutes,
it said 50.
50
Yeah.
minutes with something big, that is, repeatedly denouncing the Communist Party to very large numbers of people passing by just on the street and then making it available.
Online.
That is probably the highest profile protest in China since Tiananmen Square, just in terms of the number of people who are actually aware of it. I'm somebody who knows Chinese political history will know better than I what. But that's a high impact, high visibility protest.
Well, I hope he's able to get asylum. So I'm going to show folks my painting I did. I finished it yesterday and people are asking about it. So I made a bigger version of the Thurgood Marshall. Ben has a version of this. Um,
Hanging on my living room wall.
yes. So, but the great thing about this is that a teacher reached out to me through my Etsy site, and told me, asked for, he wanted one of these. He wanted a bigger one if possible. So I did a little bit bigger. Um, because he's a high school teacher, and his kids, he wanted something in the background that would be memorable, for his students' video essays applications for the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. And I just thought that was so amazing. And I really wanted to just donate this to him, but he's insisting on paying me something. So I don't think I can stop him. So anyway, this is going to be in videos of Thurgood Marshall College Fund applications. And I just think that's so great. I'm so tickled about it. And
That
I
is
love
awesome.
and I love this quote, um because it's just so perfect. It says, "Where you see wrong or injustice, speak out, because this is your country. This is your democracy. Make it, protect it, pass it on." And I just feel like it's perfect for our times, because that's what we've got to do. We've got
You
to,
want to hear an awesome story about Thurgood Marshall?
yes.
Um, so it's a little bit off color. Um, and it's sort of about Thurgood Marshall, but it's sort of about a law professor from uh, the law professor who ended up writing the briefs in Brown v. Board of Ed. And uh, um, uh, whose grandson, by the way, um, uh, I met recently at the wedding of one Janine Belechian. Um, so the law professor's name is Charles Black. He is perhaps most famous for having written a book called Impeachment, a handbook, which is the best book ever written. It's very short, a little manual about impeachment, um, and about was written in the Watergate era. It's quite wonderful. And um, Charles Black was a young law professor then at Columbia, and he was from Texas. And he walks one day into the headquarters of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, which um, uh, Thurgood Marshall was then running and was working on Brown v. Board, and um, asks to be of help. So Black was, among other things, a poet. He published a number of books of poetry. If you read the briefs in Brown v. Board, they are incredibly beautifully written. And um, he, this was not a place where Southern legal scholars with thick drawl accents from uh, from Texas hung out. And so there was a lot of admiration for Black, but there was also a who the fuck is this guy kind of, this was, 1953 New York. And so eventually Thurgood Marshall says to him, um, we all appreciate the work that you're doing, but like, kind of what are you doing here? And Black responds, and this story, by the way, was um, told to me by a close friend of blacks who knew Thurgood Marshall, um, and um, and I assumed that it was, apocryphal until I read it in the book Simple Justice, which is a history of the case. So Black responds, "Well, I grew up in Texas, and whenever I would do something wrong, my mother would say to me, oh, if you do that, it will help the NAACP." And and so I asked her, um, what is the NAACP? And she said, if you go all the way far north, you will get to New York City. And if you go to the tallest building in New York City, to the top floor, you will find the NAACP. And if you go to the big conference room there's 1,000 hooks on the wall. And on every one of those hooks hangs the virtue of a white Southern woman. And I said to myself, now that is an organization I want to get involved with. Um, and um, and Thurgood Marshall did exactly what you're doing now, which is he burst out laughing. And those the serious side of that story is that those briefs are um, an incredible thing of beauty. And moreover, Charles Black later went on to, when Brown v. Board was criticized by uh, some very prominent law professors, particularly Herbert Weschler, for lacking a neutral principle. Um, he wrote what I think is still the most moving law review article ever written. And it is an article about in defense of the desegregation decisions. And I will pull it up while we're chatting and read a passage of it. Um, it's the story is hilarious, but this was a guy who, showed up in NAACP Legal Defense Fund headquarters and made an incredible contribution to American history by doing exactly what is on in your pictures uh, uh, admonition.
Yeah, that's a great story, and I had heard of Charles Black, but I didn't know the full backstory there. Um, yeah, see, don't this is what I don't understand about right now is like we look back on history and those are the people that we admire, those Thurgood Marshall, Charles Black, the various white activists who there weren't many of them who joined the civil rights movement. And it's just like don't you want to isn't that who you want to be now? Like, I don't understand. Do people who are going along with this MAGA nonsense, do they really think that their grandchildren will admire that someday? Like, I just don't understand do they have no, like Marco Ruby, like, where do you think this ends? Have you not seen the direction the arc of history bends? And it will bend. It may take a while, but it will bend back towards justice. And your name will be written on the wrong page. And I just really don't like, this is what's so prominent in my mind. I mean, to be honest, my parents are fine people. My in-laws are fine people. They're not, but they were young adults in the 60s, and it's like they all claim to, oh, we didn't like segregation. We were sort of quietly cheering for the civil rights movement. But there's zero evidence of that. There's no evidence that any of them ever went to a march, ever went. And I'm just like, how can you be alive during that time and not just be out in the streets being counted, you know? I'm very conscious, and again, I respect my parents and in-laws and older relatives, you know, and I'm sure they had small, some of them had small children. There were various extenuating circumstances. My dad was in the military, which probably precluded his activism for sure. But it's like, you know, like seriously, I don't want anybody wondering like years hence like where grandma was during an authoritarian takeover, you know? Like I want the record to be quite clear, you know, where where I
I could
was.
not agree with you more. So here is the passage that I think of all the time. Uh, so he's identified, the background here is he's identified the principle as equality, and is is contemplating the notion that separate can nonetheless conform with equality. Does segregation offend against equality? Equality, like all general concepts, has marginal areas where philosophic difficulties are encountered. But if a whole race of people finds itself confined within a system which is set up and continued for the very purpose of keeping it in an inferior station, and if the question is then solemnly propounded whether such a race is being treated equally, I think we ought to exercise one of the sovereign prerogatives of philosophers, that of laughter. The only question remaining after we get our laughter under control is whether the segregation system answers to this description. Here, I must confess to a tendency to start laughing all over again. I was raised in the South, in a Texas city where the pattern of segregation was firmly fixed. I am sure it never occurred to anyone, white or colored, to question its meaning. The fiction of equality is just about on a level with the fiction of finding in the action of trover. I think few candid Southerners deny this. Northern people may be misled by the entirely sincere protestations of many Southerners that segregation is better for the Negroes, is not intended to hurt them. But I think a little probing would demonstrate that what is meant is that it is better for the Negroes to accept a position of inferiority, at least for the indefinite future. So this is the serious side of a guy who, confronted by Thurgood Marshall with "What are you doing here?" pretended it was about the hooks on the wall with the virtue of white Southern women on them.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
anyway, detour onto Charles Black.
Well, good guy. So, speaking of the arc of history bending towards justice, yesterday I happened to be on Capitol Hill for a coffee. And so I decided to walk over to there was a small rally ahead of it wasn't that small actually, there was a couple hundred people there, but ahead of the press conference with the Epstein survivors. And you know, talk about a layered lasagna. It was a spectacle. I mean, it was a real spectacle. First of all, these brave, I think this is probably the largest public gathering of the survivors. I don't know how many of them were actually there. But one of the most moving parts of the rally before the press conference was a woman getting up on the stage with her attorney who spoke for her because she was too overcome and frightened to speak, who had never revealed herself publicly, either by name or with voice or with picture. She had never been publicly identified in any way as a survivor. They called her Rosa, although I'm not sure what her real name was. And she, as he described her case, the lawyer, and spoke on her behalf, she just stood there on the stage and just like sobbed. Um, And it was incredibly moving. And the worst part of her story is that she was trafficked after this 2008 deal by which Epstein got a slap on the wrist, and that's it. That was negotiated by Alex Acosta. She was trafficked from Uzbekistan, actually, after that. After that, and
Is
you know,
she Uzbek
yeah,
or
well, I don't know what she is now, but she was originally from Uzbekistan and thought she was coming to get a modeling contract and ended up being sex trafficked by Epstein and Maxwell. Um, Very moving. All of them were moving. Of course, they many of them referenced the probably the most visible survivor before her death by suicide earlier this year, Virginia Giuffre, which was also very moving. Um, and it's just so tragic that she succumbed to just all of the abuse and demons that followed her. Um, so then after the rally, and the rally was a mixture of, people there. Probably most of the people had signs, just supporting survivors and believe women and things like that. But then, of course, there was various cranks, conspiracy theorists milling about. So then, just across the way, the press conference started, and that was like packed with people. Like eventually, Capitol Police had to clear the area because there was just so many people there, and I guess they were not expecting that or prepared, and thought that was not a great idea. But um, a very motley, a very strange alliance. So the Republicans that are pressing for the release of the files are some of the most MAGA of the MAGA. Um, so I saw Marjorie Taylor Greene in the flesh, guys. She's very blonde and very tan in real life. So she's even blonder and tanner in real life. So she spoke, and then not present, but who signed on to this, effort was Lauren Boebert and Nancy Mace, and then Thomas Massie is one of the co-sponsors with Ro Khanna, who's a Democrat, and they're co-sponsoring a motion to, I don't know, basically it's a motion to bring to a vote whether to compel the release of these files. I'm not up on my congressional procedure, but the craziest thing was, again, there was a mixture of conspiracy cranks and survivor advocates and things like that. But I would say the vast majority of signage was clearly anti-Trump. It was pictures of him with Epstein. It was, he's on the list. It was clearly anti-Trump. And the optics, and you can find this press conference online, and so you can see this for yourself, of Marjorie Taylor Greene speaking, surrounded by all this anti-Trump signs. I mean, it's just like kind of mind bending. I agree with JVL of the Bulwark, who has always said that Marjorie Taylor Greene is the most sincere MAGA. Like, she really believes what she says, like, unlike many of them who are just sort of, glomming onto something manipulative and for some other political purpose. Like, she's the most sincere, and so therefore, like, she believes in the whole QAnon thing, and so therefore, like, but she's also been the most like pro Trump, so,
yeah,
like
look,
slavish. Remember the one where of her like kissing his, like, this cutout of him, and like, I mean, just like lots of cringe things over the years. So it's very weird. It's a very weird thing, this issue.
I will just say a few things about this. One is everybody should be careful about getting in bed with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tom
Oh yeah.
Massey, and this is, um, you know, a crowd of people who are, uh, deeply, deeply conspiratorial. Um, they do not share our, and by our, I mean everybody here from the hard left to the bulwark right. I mean our, collective democratic values. These are not democratic actors. I believe in marriages of convenience in some situations, and I think for this purpose, it is um, useful to to cooperate with them, but don't ever forget that you're cooperating with people who are um,
That
in
shit.
it for very different reasons than
And
you
he's
are,
batshit
and
crazy.
be mindful um, of the implications of being in a coalition with them. Um, Again, I'm not saying don't do it. You count to 218 by whatever means you count. But don't ever think that because you're on Marjorie Taylor Greene's side on this issue that she won't say that you're drinking adrenochrome from the throats of babies tomorrow.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and I agree with JVL that she is sincere, um, but
But she's
that makes it
crazy. She's
worse.
sincerely crazy.
Right. I mean, she's sincerely insane, and she believes the stuff about Jewish space lasers.
Yeah. I
And
think she believes everything she says.
oh, at least in the moment in which she says it.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, at least J.D. Vance, who is infinitely cynical,
Yes.
um, is therefore predictable by the direction that the cynicism would and should take him in any given moment. Um, and I do think that there's something profoundly dangerous about the people who actually believe their own craziness,
Yeah.
whether that's Alex Jones or Marjorie Taylor Greene or I don't know what Lauren Boebert is.
Yeah, nobody knows what she is. So I have a question for you though, related to this case that I don't think I've ever asked you or heard you talk about. So I just don't understand this 2008 deal that the federal government, it was the federal government under, I guess, the U.S. attorney, he was U.S. attorney for
Mhm.
that district at the time, Alex Acosta. Like, what in the fuck were they thinking? Like, the evidence of Jeffrey Epstein being a horrible, like, serious menace and not more like a criminal sex trafficker was overwhelming. There were like dozens and dozens of girls in Florida, dozens at that time. Not to mention the report starting in their late 90s in New York. The two Farmer sisters, Annie Farmer, and I forget her sister's name. And then there was a survivor at the rally yesterday who also made a report in 1997 in New York. And so I'm just like, what? This, like, what in the world? I just don't understand.
Um, so, a few things. Um, the first is that you might consider reading um, this, which is to say, it is a report from 2020 into the resolution of the in federal investigation of Epstein in 2006 to 2008. Um, and It is, I don't know, 15 pages long, and it has an account. I think it's the most detailed account that we have of um, uh, um, uh, um, it's the most detailed account that we have of how that deal came to be. Um, and uh, it is not a wholly satisfying um, account. There is Uh, but it does have on um, it does have a uh, significant discussion um, of the issue, and it says the following. OPR concludes that Acosta's decision to resolve the federal investigation through the NPA constitutes poor judgment. Although this decision was within the scope of Acosta's broad discretion, and OPR does not find that it resulted from improper factors, the NPA was a flawed mechanism for satisfying the federal interest that caused the government to open its investigation of Epstein. In Acosta's view, the federal government's role in prosecuting Epstein was limited by principles of federalism, under which the independent authority of the state should be recognized, and the federal responsibility in this situation was to serve as a backstop to state authorities by encouraging them to do more. However, Acosta failed to consider the difficulties inherent in a resolution that relied heavily on action by numerous state officials over whom he had no authority. He resolved the federal investigation before significant investigative steps were completed, and he agreed to several unusual and problematic terms in the NPA without consideration required under the circumstances. In sum, his application of federalism principles was too expansive, his view of the federal interest in prosecuting Epstein was too narrow, and his understanding of the state system was too imperfect to justify the decision to use the NPA. Furthermore, because Acosta assumed a significant role in reviewing and drafting the NPA, and the other three subjects who were supervisors left the U.S. Attorney's Office, were transitioning to other jobs, or were absent at critical junctures, Acosta should have ensured more effective coordination and communication during the negotiations and before approving the final NPA. It was a unique resolution and one that required greater oversight and supervision than he provided.
Well, this raises the other point too, which it brings up, which is also like, why didn't the state, or like, why wasn't he prosecuted under Florida law?
Well, he was. That was the plea agreement that had him serve 13 months and, with home confined, like going home, going to work
For
every day.
raping multiple children. Like,
Uh,
it's just like, I just don't, it just boggles the mind.
it boggles the mind. Um,
I just, honestly, just across the board as a general point, and I have some both, not me personally, but friends and, loved ones who have been through this, unfortunately. The penalties for sex crimes are absurdly light. Like, it's like the message sent to me is that women and girls are basically worthless. Like, you can rape someone and like not even go to jail.
so I have some, I don't know if it counts as personal experience with this, but I guess scholarly experience with it, because I did, uh, along with Quinta and two other colleagues, a very substantial report a number of years ago about sextortion crimes. And the variability of penalties in these sextortion cases is so extreme that I, I mean, I was left kind of speechless by it. So, um, and they depend, the variability depends on factors that have very little bearing on the morality of the conduct. So, if you are prosecuted, notwithstanding the Epstein case, if you are prosecuted by the feds, um, there is substantial time available. But if you're prosecuted by the state authorities, we looked at cases where people, were had hundreds of victims or dozens of victims, and would do, 10 months, 13 months. Um, and if you are, so there's the state federal distinction, which is clearly at issue here, right? Uh, Florida either didn't have the tools or didn't use them. Um, there's also at the federal level um, a deranged distinction between adult victims and child victims. So if your victims are children at the federal level, because this is now online stuff, you're dealing with images. You have you're dealing with mandatory minimums under the child pornography laws, and those are 15 years per count. So you do child victims at the federal level, you're going to jail for the
Well,
rest of
he
your life.
had child victims.
Right, but no, but these were, but this is, I'm talking now about the sextortion cases.
Oh, I see.
Um, but if you have only adult women victims, um, it is, you know, you can knock several zeros off of the amount of time you're likely to do. And I think the rational the irrational nature of the sentencing regimes, it's probably less true with hands-on abuse, but but y- you notice these patterns that are really dramatic, and they reflect the fact that these laws are passed in a sort of slipshod fashion without thinking about the system that they create together. And it's a terrible, terrible situation.
Anyway, I'm like routinely appalled when I see cases, reported in the news of the sentencing of people. It's just like unbelievable. I uh I know of a case, the victim was drugged and raped, and the not only did the perpetrator not even didn't even go to jail at all, like did a plea. I don't even think he's on a sex registry list. Like somehow he pleaded it down to like nothing. um so and now she was the victim. One of the problems is she was so beaten down and exhausted and traumatized that she ended up you know, basically saying agreeing with to the plea as well, the victim, because she just didn't have the energy to deal with it. But it's like the victim shouldn't this should not even be on the table. Anyway, it's
Look,
just
and these are only the cases where there's actual prosecution. The overwhelming issue in sex crimes cases is the fact that a lot of them never get prosecuted at all.
yeah.
And look, it is a terrible problem, and it is way broader than Jeffrey Epstein, but
Oh, yeah.
Epstein is an extraordinary example of
Yeah.
it.
I mean, that he could get away with such egregious and extensive, not just sexual assault and abuse, but trafficking for decades. I mean, it's just the if because I watched. There's a documentary on Netflix, and then there's various investigations you can read and podcast versions of them. Julie Brown's, obviously her work is essential. But like the it just it when you look at, like, it blows your mind how big this was. Like it was just, I mean, there's probably thousands of victims, and how organized it was, and how many people saw things and must have known things and never said anything, and for decades. It just really blows the mind.
Yes. Um, and, you know, the only thing that pushes me slightly in the opposite direction from saying dump it all out there and let the chips fall where they may, is that there is this crazed desire on the part of a lot of people to mingle it with pre-existing unrelated conspiracy theories that are fundamentally authoritarian in character. And MTG does not want these materials out there for the same reason that you do.
Yeah.
And uh I'm troubled by, even as I, think there needs to be accountability for this, I'm troubled by what the information ecosystem is going to do with the
Yeah, me
accountability,
too.
because it's not going to identify, okay, here were the rich powerful men who were raping young girls uh, on Jeffrey Epstein's uh, 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 I don't know,
Island.
island payroll under his auspices. It's going to identify the people who are convenient targets anyway, because, and who may have flown on his plane unknowingly, or who may have, done business with him in some capacity, but who are useful targets for some conspiracy theorist or other. And I really do worry about the use that is going to be made of this, even as I think,
Oh,
honestly,
absolutely.
everybody who has dirty hands in this should be outed in public and should face the music. I also don't have any confidence that that's likely to be the result.
Yeah, I mean, and as many people have said, like it's highly um unusual for files in an investigation to be released that did not yield. Usually, these things you speak in court. It has to be under court filing, and if no charges result, it's not for good reason. It's not normal or typical for such things to be made public.
It's true, although it does happen. See the Mueller report, right? See, there
Yeah,
are
yeah, yeah.
formats in which, I mean, honestly, the format in which I would like to see this stuff released is a responsible congressional investigation. And, the records exist, they're there. Instead of Jim Comer dumping them in public and probably selectively, um, you know, you could have a professional staff of staff attorneys and investigators that do what they did in the Ukraine scandal, right? That do what they did in the January 6th scandal. But I do think the absence of filtration that we're going to
Yeah,
get
I
here
agree.
is going to cause a
Hmm.
lot of innocent lives to be ruined, and
Yeah.
paradoxically will also shield a lot of malevolent, guilty people, because they're not the kind of people who it is convenient for Laura Loomer or Marjorie Taylor Greene to make a villain of.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The last thing I'll mention with 2 minutes left is that both Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is obviously not a credible source, but and one of the victims' lawyers mentioned that the CIA had files related to this, which I find dubious because, well, we there is very very strict lines. Both Maxwell and Epstein, and um, many of the alleged people involved are Americans, and this is clearly, and that would be handed off to the FBI, even if some of the co-conspirators were foreigners. I don't doubt that there might have been incidental collection, but I haven't seen anything that this is the type of thing that CIA would have investigated.
Yeah, it's not obvious what the foreign intelligence nexus
He
would be
says
here.
there's a Mossad, rumored ties to the Mossad between
Yes, there
Epstein.
have been
Okay, there might be something like that,
long-standing rumors that there was a
but I don't.
Mossad connection that I
But again,
that
if it's an American citizen, it would immediately be immediately, like hot potato,
handed
handed
off to the
over to
Bureau.
FBI
And
counterintelligence.
as best as I can tell, the Mossad connection theory is just a reflection of the fact that the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak was associated with Epstein in some respect. And I guess I don't know if that was in a business sense or in an exploitation of children sense, but he was a visitor apparently.
And then there's
Um,
a rumor that he was actually a source of the CIA, which
right,
I don't know.
but being a source of the CIA in like a lot of people are like that is not the source of his power. That's not where the
Also,
money came from.
yeah.
It's not and so you know the uh uh yeah, so I don't take that very seriously. Obviously, if the CIA has materials that are relevant and they, should figure out a way to make public whatever they can. All right, we are going to wrap up. Folks, I had no idea where this show was going. I didn't know we were going to talk about Jeffrey Epstein. I didn't know we were going to talk about Robert Black. I certainly didn't know we were going to talk about them in the same show. Didn't know we were going to talk about that wonderful projection operation. That's just what happens when you wake up one morning, roll out of bed, and before you've finished your first cup of coffee, you're doing a live stream. We're going to be back tomorrow. I have no idea who the co hosts are going to be. I have no idea who the guests are going to be, but I know that you'll be there and I'll be there because if I'm not there, there won't be a show. And it's going to be a blast.